Experience the future of storage with the Intel SSD 750 series, delivering uncompromised performance with NVMe Express and PCIe 3.0. Click now to learn how you can win one free from Intel and PC Perspective. Hey everybody, welcome to PC Perspective. I'm Ryan Shrout, joined by Alan Malventano. Today we're here to talk to you about a monitor from Acer, the XB270HU. Is this a Predator branded product?
There's the word Predator is in the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Model numbers are hard, so XB270HU. It should give you a couple hints on the specifications of this. It is a 27-inch display, 2560 by 1440.
Right.
G-Sync.
Yeah.
Right. But this is an IPS monitor.
It is.
So
we've been waiting for this.
I believe this is the first IPS G-Sync monitor out on the market.
Yeah.
Right. We've gone through, I don't know, half dozen or so other G-Sync monitors. If you look at 1080p, 4K, 25 by 14, but they've all been TN-based screens up to this point.
Yep.
Which has been a limiting factor. Every time we've talked about those monitors, we've always talked about how, hey, this is a TN screen, but it doesn't look that bad.
And they don't.
It's still true.
I mean, they really don't, especially the 1440p ones. The very small pixel, relatively small pixel pitch compared to like a 1080p panel that's a large one, right? And just the effects of when you rotate the screen or look at it off angle, they didn't look that bad.
Right.
But it was not IPS.
Correct.
It was clearly not IPS, right?
If you are a user that had been on TN panels before, going to a TN G-Sync would have been an improvement both in image quality and in terms of playability.
Sure.
Right. But if you were an IPS user, going to a TN G-Sync panel, you'd be gaining advantages in terms of the variable refresh rate, but you'd be losing stuff in terms of the image quality of the screen itself.
Right.
So the answer to that is this first screen here from Acer. So we talked about specifications. Before we get into kind of what our thoughts and what your use cases are, because Alan actually bought one of these monitors and this is your primary display now at your house, right?
Yep.
I mean, what else is there to talk about? We talked about the specs. We can talk about usability of the display.
I don't think we mentioned it's 144 hertz panel,
true.
Which you might have been surprised by considering it's IPS, and IPS is usually associated with a lower response time, relatively.
Definitely lower than TN,
right? Yeah, or longer response time, I should say, right? Response time, like for something TN panel like the ROG Swift, was like 1 millisecond. This is rated at 4 milliseconds. So it's still, one frame at 144 hertz is 7 milliseconds, so it's still obviously shorter than that, right?
It's still inside the window.
Yeah, it's still in that window. It's still capable of going 144, physically, right? Yeah, but it's basically, for those that are familiar with the panels like the ROG Swift, this is basically an ROG Swift as far as most of the specs go, except the IPS part, really.
So this still supports ULMB.
It does at different frequencies, or at different refresh rates than the Swift did. Okay, so the Swift, I believe, was 100 and 120. For ULMB.
It was.
This panel is 85 and 100 for ULMB. And that's most likely because of the longer response time of the pixels, just because it's an IPS panel. It can't go that fast and do ULMB.
So for those who don't know, ULMB, ultra low motion blur, it is a technology based off light boost when NVIDIA was creating 3D vision.
It's like Light Boost 2, kind of.
Right. It's like Light Boost 2.0. G-Sync monitors can either be in a G-Sync variable refresh mode, or they can be in ULMB mode, and you can go on forums and look at different places and have the arguments about which is better for what games and things like that. We don't really need to get into that specifically here.
And along those lines, actually, this panel cannot do 3D vision.
Correct.
Right. Also, for that same kind of reason, it's just not as fast of a panel, right?
So we keep comparing this to the ASUS ROG Swift, and I think that's a fair comparison because that was our favorite G-Sync monitor.
It was
before. This one probably takes over for that, but there are some places where this one falls short.
Yeah. Like for example, this very glossy bezel.
Yeah.
It kind of drives me crazy. It's like just this really, really glossy kind of plasticky stuff, and so is the base. And it's like, there are parts of the panel, like the back of the panel has a very nice kind of matte finish to it.
Right.
We'll have shots in the B-roll to show while we're talking about this, obviously. But even the very back of like the stand itself looks really nice. But then when you get to the front of stuff, like it's almost like Fisher-Pricey kind of toy-like appearance, right?
I think it's very fair to say that the build quality in general of the Acer monitors that we have seen recently, whether it be G-Sync or just like kind of the first generation of 4K panels, very much modeled after this design.
Right.
And it's lacking there, right? Like there's when I push it, it's a little bit more wobbly than the ROG Swift is.
That's true.
This has all the same capabilities. You can height adjust. You can rotate.
They're all the same actually. Like compared to the Swift, like how many degrees it goes back, forward, all the articulation, all that stuff is basically the same. It just looks kind of more like a
sitting
toy.
on your desk. The ROG Swift looks more like a serious monitor, right? It looks better physically than this does for sure. But you have those trade-offs every once in a while.
And I mean it's right. That's just the looks of the item itself, right? But once you get to the looks of actually looking at the important part, the piece of glass in the middle there.
So let's talk about that. Yeah. The important part is the screen. If you're really hung up, you could maybe just put gaff tape all around the frame. We've done that on other TVs, it turns out.
We have.
To remove gloss bezels and borders. What's the user experience like with this compared to what you were used to? Because you did own an ROG Swift before. I did.
And before that, I was just on standard, good quality IPS, like old school Dell 30-inch kind of like high-end IPS.
25 by 16, 60 hertz displays.
And it was really painful going to the Swift as far as just color reproduction and like the contrast is not as good.
Yeah, you've mentioned to us that's like, when you're looking at it at the right angle, it's fine, but if you're slumped over a little bit, you can notice a color change. If you're over to the side, you can notice color changes, things like that.
Like especially on most TN panels, if you're below straight on,
that was always the worst.
It's just it basically just changes color. Really, it's like you're not even looking at the same colors. So this panel,
this doesn't do any of that stuff.
None of that. It's basically the visual quality of it. Basically, just goes right back to what you'd expect from a very nice quality IPS panel. Okay. Maybe even a little bit better than what my prior Dell, high-end 30-inch was, just because this is like LED backlit. The other one was the
CFL,
the CCFL, tube backlit. It's just.
So let's talk about 2D experience first. Like normal, you're sitting there, you're doing stuff, you're writing articles, you're browsing the internet.
Yeah.
All fine there, I assume. Works as a 144 hertz panel. You get the benefit of smooth mouse motion. All that stuff works as expected. Yeah,
just even doing desktop stuff just at 144 hertz. Even if it wasn't G-Sync or FreeSync or any of the adaptive anything, just that higher refresh rate, it's just easier to just point to stuff with your mouse, right? It's just like, because it's so much more real time, right?
I didn't believe it until I first used 144 hertz or 120 hertz.
All it takes is just sit down and just moving the mouse around. You're just like, whoa, that's like, it's like liquid, right? So that's cool. And then just as far as just trying to, write articles, just do stuff like from the house, just writing on it and using it as a display for productivity. It's really good. There's no flicker at all in the backlight because it's a constant current source backlight, which the Swift also had.
Right.
A lot of the LED backlit, current generation panels do that, so there's no flicker.
So what about on the gaming side? That's obviously where the G-Sync technology and features are most important.
Yep, and it's also where we've reported on some other things that, little kind of nitpicky things we've found with other G-Sync panels, as a matter of fact, right? Every time a game engine stalled or hitched, remember that issue with the ROG Swift where if the game
frame rate instantly dropped to 0.
Yeah, and the Swift would kind of like wait as long as it could before it did a refresh, and it would just kind of stay that way until the game finally started redrawing, and it was obviously like apparent flicker. Like you could see the pixels actually.
It wasn't just
flickering.
that monitor.
It wasn't. There were other ones that did it,
other
right?
monitors that did that.
As a matter of fact, I would say probably every TN G-Sync panel we did it to some degree.
Yep.
The Swift, I think, had the fastest responding pixels to it of all of them, and I think that's why it was the most apparent with that one.
Oh, gotcha.
This one, we went as far as hooking up an oscilloscope to it and just like eyeballing the scope trace and just forcing the game to hitch, because we have a couple of games that we can reproduce that very easily.
Right.
Not so much as a flicker on the scope even. So not just like visually, but like even with very sensitive equipment measuring it, it wasn't even moving.
It's good.
Right. So that's great. Yeah.
Normal gaming, but it's in terms of just like, we've talked about G-Sync experiences and variable refresh experiences.
Yeah.
Gaming-wise, it all works as expected, right?
It's all pretty much the same as all the other G-Sync panels in that respect.
We don't want to spend too much time kind of explaining the G-Sync stuff. We have plenty of videos and stories at PCPro.com that go into that detail specifically. Needless to say, this goes all the way up to 144 hertz at a variable refresh rate, and it has fundamentally no bottom out on the refresh rate either, right? So if you're interested in that debate, this monitor doesn't introduce any changes in that regard. It literally is taking kind of all the goodness that was in the ROG Swift and other panels and just making it IPS, which just improves the overall color reproduction, viewing angles, all that stuff.
And I think there might even be maybe some, they might have revised the G-Sync module a little bit in that time, right? It's been over a year.
It's possible.
Maybe that flicker thing, maybe this panel might have had some of that, but I think maybe they just must have did some
We still have the same limitations of G-Sync though here. There's only one input, right?
That's true. Yeah,
still only one display port.
Only display port, nothing else.
So if you have a DVI, if you have another system that you just wanted to hook it up for DVI and you didn't care about VRR or something like that, you don't get that option. You have to do DisplayPort on this. Also, it's expensive.
It is. $800.
Retail price is $799 on this monitor, which I think is where the ROG Swift launched at.
I believe so too.
That was where its MSRP was. It sold much higher than that for a significant period of time because it was so hard to find.
Yeah, this panel is not doing that.
It's easier to find.
It is easier to find, but it did sell out. Like they did a pre-order deal, and they actually had like a $50 off sale, believe it or not, on this, which was kind of weird.
Yep.
But they did that. They sold out of that pretty quick. But I think they're in stock.
It's in stock on Amazon for $7.95, so you can get it. It's still, it's still expensive, right? There are other IPS 2560 by 14 monitors out there that aren't VRR,
that are
G-Sync or FreeSync, right? They're going to be less expensive than this. So you are still paying a premium, whether or not it comes from NVIDIA, it comes from the manufacturer, it comes from just the name of, association of G-Sync.
Yeah.
It is more expensive. But if you know G-Sync is something that you want, or in your case, you had a G-Sync monitor already, but it was TN, and you knew that you liked how the technology worked, you were willing to kind of sell that monitor at whatever loss it was, buy this one as the trade-off for it. So, I think that's fundamentally still the most disappointing part, is that these monitors are still high-priced.
Yeah.
I was hoping as soon as FreeSync launched, we'd see a lot of this drop. We haven't seen that yet.
Haven't seen any.
Haven't seen that yet. Maybe it's still coming. I have to believe that that's still going to be the case in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on this or anything to point out?
No, performance-wise, I'm more than impressed. It's just the look of it.
Yeah.
I just wish that they had kind of revised the...
You would think for $800, it looks very plasticky.
Yeah, I almost wish they did what they did with the Acer, the FreeSync, that other Acer FreeSync panel.
Yeah.
Where they did the little X-shaped stand and everything, and it has like that
It looks different if nothing else.
Yeah, my only real kind of beef with that, that stand doesn't...
It didn't have height adjustment either.
It doesn't have height adjustment. It doesn't pivot.
Angle,
but it still looks better than this, right? So
I imagine we'll see some of those changes in the not too distant future. That won't help you if you're interested in this particular monitor.
I'm happy with it regardless. So
So go to PCPro.com, check out the full review Alan wrote up, so you can look at different images, you can see viewing angles, you can see all that other stuff included in that, in addition to here. So check that out, PCPro.com. We'll have a link in the description below. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.